Good morning and welcome to the second day of the BEHAVE conference. My name is Irmeli Mikkonen and I will be moderating this plenary session representing the European Energy Network, ENR. First of all, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Copenhagen Center on Energy Efficiency at the UNEP DTU partnership for making this BEHAVE conference happen. Gabriela, Xian Li, the team, thank you very much for your dedication, hard work, and flexibility in the organization of the conference. We all know that it has required an extra effort to modify the originally planned live conference into a successful, smooth-running online event, which we all experience today. Thank you for your kind words on my role in this conference yesterday. However, I haven't been here alone. I have an excellent team working with me, the working group on behavior change of ENR, the ENR Troika led by Adem, the current presidency and secretariat of the ENR network. On behalf of the ENR network and myself, thank you again. It has been a pleasure working with you. I briefly introduce myself now before introduction of practicalities and the program of this plenary session and our distinguished speakers this morning. I have worked for quite a while as a senior expert in MOTIVA, a state-owned sustainable development company in Finland. My days are filled with projects related to behavior change and consumer choices and in development of energy competence of professionals. Some of my recent projects cover social innovation in the energy field, energy experiments and pilots, and energy skills development of professionals, especially in building sector with special focus on behavior change. I also worked on several European behavior change and skills development projects as a member of the advisory board. I currently chair the ENR working group on behavior change. First, a reminder of the house rules we have. You all are probably already very familiar with this, but just to remind that only the moderator and speakers can mute and unmute themselves and share their screens. All participants are muted once you join the conference. Please have your web camera turned only on when you're speaking, and that's, well, unfortunately only means that moderator and speakers can do that. Questions and answers will we'll have this function in chat, and please send the questions to moderator, myself this morning, and I will pass on the questions to the speakers. And we have breakout rooms then after this plenary sessions, but I will come back to that at the end of this session. And I hope you all have the latest Zoom version 5.6 that will enable you to use all the functionalities, for example, the breakout rooms. And for your information, the conference will be recorded and it will be uploaded in the conference webpage later on. We have 3 distinguished speakers today. Our first speaker is representing the Portuguese presidency of the Council of the European Union, Her Excellency Inês dos Santos Costa. She's the Secretary of State for Environment. She's Master of Engineering Policy and Technology Management and holds a doctorate in environmental engineering. Between 2002 and 2010, She developed research work at IN plus Center for Studies in Innovation, Technology and Development Policies, especially in the areas of corporate sustainability and industrial ecology. Within these areas, she has worked on environmental policies, waste management, eco-parks, and industrial symbiosis. She is the author and co-author of scientific articles, books, and technical documents in the field of industrial ecology. In 2006, she was a guest researcher at the Center for Industrial Ecology at Yale University in the United States. Since 2010, she has worked as a senior consultant at Three Drivers in Haria, in Vasovo Ambiente, where she has developed sustainable resource management projects in various sectors, namely with managing entities of specific waste streams, energy sector, municipal councils, among others. She also was a partner of the company between 2016 and until October 2019. She was aide to the Minister of the Environment and to the Minister of Environment and Energy Transition for the Circular Economy in 2016 and 2018 respectively, during the 21st Constitutional Government. She is, however, unable to join us live today, but she will address this conference with a recorded speech she kindly provided us. And let's have her speech now on.
So good morning to all the participants, and allow me a first word to congratulate the organization for being able to carry out this relevant conference in these challenging times for us all. And I'm very glad that you did, because we are right now in a very pivotal moment in terms of our action towards our fulfillment of the Green Deal, the European Green Deal. I think it's the right moment to speak about behavior, because the targets are set, the ambition is there. We want change, but the question is, are we willing to change? We are witnessing and being active agents in a global energy transformation. After centuries of fossil fuel-based energy, we are now witnessing a growing number of countries committed to carbon neutrality, to renewable production. But I am sure that this commitment can certainly be quicker and perhaps more effective if it's driven by a behavioral change from policy making, behavioral change to community level behavioral change. So I think that is the transformation that is needed in order to get to 1.5 degrees of the Paris Climate Accord. The changes in the social and economic architecture that support the measures that everyone knows that make sense, but right now the field is not exactly tipped in their favor. So how will we perform this transition? Who will be the main actors and what will be the main drivers for this change to happen? First, let me full disclosure, I am known to be a person that is somewhat critical about the energy being the dominant topic in the discussions surrounding sustainability or even climate change action. Of course, energy is a very important part of that talk, of that discussion, but I believe that we seem to be a little bit less inclined to talk about other type of challenges that are related to energy, but we seem not to want to talk about them. For example, resource extraction and consumption, the emissions derived from resource extraction and consumption, or the pollution associated with our economic model, or the biodiversity loss caused by it. So let me try to explain this in other words. If we somehow were able to change all the world's energy from dirty to clean, would that mean our environmental woes would be over? I think everyone understands that that would not be the case. So that is why when we're talking about behavioral change and transformation, it's just not energy technology or the energy source, or even, I dare say, in terms of efficiency. If we understood efficiency as making room in order to consume more energy. That's why I think we need to have a systemic approach in order to effectively reduce our consumption of raw materials and energy. And we cannot get there without talking about behavioral change and what can nudge and trigger this change towards the right path. I think we will only succeed in doing that if we really put people at the center of this transition, either as the main beneficiaries of that change and those transformations that we are currently designing and implementing, but also as the actors and drivers, promoters themselves of that behavioral change. And transformations in the energy sector can certainly be a driver for these changes in support of this societal transition towards a low carbon and more sustainable future. But let's not kid ourselves, energy-related behavior is hard to change, especially when we look beyond electricity use, for example, and go for the embedded energy into our everyday products and services. So when it comes to energy efficiency, is my strong belief that we must start to talk about it in tandem with energy sufficiency, especially in order to avoid those rebound effects that I mentioned earlier. So that is perhaps a challenge that I leave for your discussion today. Within the EU, we have been fortunate enough to have the mechanisms, to be working and implementing the mechanisms in order to move forward with this tandem vision. For example, for more than 2 decades, the EU energy label has contributed to drive purchase decisions towards more efficient products by influencing consumer purchasing behavior and helping EU consumers cut their energy bills and carbon footprint. That is evident when we look, for example, at the 2019 Eurobarometer survey on Europeans' attitudes on EU energy and policy, that show that over 90% of consumers confirm they recognize the EU energy label, and almost 80% confirm that, in fact, they have used information from the label to make the decisions on which type of product to buy, from fridges to freezers to light bulbs. There's a new rescaled EU energy label that is being deployed in all shops and online retailers from March 1st, 2021 for the most energy-consuming home appliances, so fridges and freezers, dishwashers, washing machines, and television sets. And other product groups will be rescaled in the coming years, and new labels for other products will follow this September. The new label will reintroduce the original and more simple A to G scale, as well as a different layout with clearer, more modern icons, as well as several new elements with additional information about the product itself. So the EU energy efficiency label is a good example of how European energy efficiency policy triggered small individual and often invisible new individual energy behavior and social practices with, of course, many benefits for consumers, the environment, and the economy. And how is this being worked in tandem with energy sufficiency? How does energy sufficiency comes into play? It comes into play when we talk about, for example, about the right to repair or ensuring product circularity, which is included within the Sustainable Products Initiative of the Commission, which is currently under public consultation until June. So these two can certainly work together in order to avoid to being efficient and sufficient in terms of our energy consumption. Fortunately, Europe is full with examples of policies and initiatives that are being designed in order to improve this energy transition and giving us the opportunity to change. This is the example, for example, of the EU's Renovation Wave initiative, which is currently being discussed within the EU Council under the leadership of the Portuguese presidency of the Council of the EU. This initiative was launched by the European Commission in October last year as a key pillar of the European Green Deal, and the key initiative to drive energy efficiency in the building sector, contributing to climate and environmental goals. Because buildings account for 40% of Europe's energy consumption, 36% of greenhouse gas emissions, and knowing that approximately 80% of today's buildings will still be in use in 2050, and 75% of this stock is energy inefficient. So energy renovation is crucial to Europe's path to reach net zero emissions by 2050. So many municipalities across Europe are carrying out ambitious renovation programs, contributing to local-driven energy transitions and the need to revitalize local economies. And for example, some municipalities are already developing local one-stop shops as an instrument to facilitate first-level and personalized advice on the implementation of energy efficiency measures in your home. So, and also working on leveraging on local connections with installers, with contractors, as well as easing information on subsidies, for example, and other public incentive schemes and new financing schemes, all in favor of the citizen. So, by making available to homeowners a single point of contact, all the information and advice needed to make energy retrofit a simple, straightforward, and attractive process, and as a driver of housing renovations in line with 2050 climate neutrality target, local initiatives encouraging renovation investments like the deployment of one-stop shops are in fact key instruments for energy efficiency related behavior change by increasing the acceptability of renovation projects and overcoming the lack of information, one main obstacle to building renovation. At the national level, several initiatives are also being designed in order to guarantee adequate financing to renovation of buildings, and this area has been identified as a crucial one for the green recovery of our economies in this post-COVID period, promoting jobs, promoting economic opportunities while safeguarding the environment and promoting sustainability. Stakeholder engagement, including the engagement by the consumer, is a fundamental part of the transformation. So over the last 50 years, we got used to easily accessible resources, to affordable prices, to easily consuming and disposing of them. It is clear that this way of life, this linear economy is no longer possible. We must, in fact, reduce the extraction and consumption of raw materials and energy while reconciling our development model with well-being for all, prosperity for all, within the limits of our planet. So we need to drive a just, decarbonized, and circular economy. That is certainly needed. Aligned with this vision, Portugal committed itself to carbon neutrality by 2050. This objective will require more than 85% of greenhouse gas emission reductions by 2050 compared to 2005 levels. In recent years, we have worked in several areas in order to transform this goal into a reality. Several initiatives on waste, water, energy, forest, biodiversity, circular economy, bioeconomy, just to mention a few, are being implemented in order to guarantee that we comply with our 2030 and 2050 environment and climate goals. For example, we significantly increased the share of new renewables, both in the supply side and in end use. In 2020, we reached 59% of renewable share in electricity generation. However, motivation is high to go much further in the transition towards cleaner energy, thereby accelerating renewable energy uptake to reach 100% by 2050. And in this context, a special focus has also been attributed to the social aspects of this energy transition. Last week, the Portuguese government launched a public consultation on a proposal for a long-term strategy to address energy poverty for the 2021 to 2050 period. And we believe that this strategy will also be a strong contributor to perform the transition that we need to the future that we want. And finally, I will leave you on this note. since we are talking about behavioral change. There is a tendency to either blame individual behavior, like not using straws or driving your own car, or downplay its importance versus, for example, political decision, like removing fossil fuel subsidies. In fact, all inputs help. They are all important right now, whether those coming from the wider top to the ones that are more local, even family or in family adjacent or personal. What is important to understand is that they are not interchangeable. We cannot substitute one for the other. They both must be promoted, they both must be demanded from either side. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I hope that you have a wonderful conference and a wonderful discussion. Thank you very much.
That was very inspiring speech, and as we all heard, that she was very encouraging to us that we are all on the right path, but also she challenged us to continue working and to be motivated to continue working on the challenges ahead of us. Unfortunately, we don't have the opportunity to ask her questions. I'm sure there are many questions in your mind to ask her, but well, that is the case today. Well, our next speaker is Mr. Karlis Goldstein. Karlis, are you online already?
Hello, yes, I am.
Okay. I believe you don't have a slide presentation, but let me introduce you. Karlis is a member of cabinet with the Commissioner for Energy, Ms. Kadri Simson. He's responsible for energy end use, including efficiency and storage. Having gathered experience in EU-level negotiations and policy in Brussels for over a decade, he has covered internal market, transport, and energy affairs. Prior to his current position, he worked in DG NR on energy efficiency and was part of a national administration. Thank you for joining us today, Karlis. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here this morning. Dear Irmeli, Mikkonen, dear friends and energy pioneers, thank you very much to the organizing team as well for setting up such an excellent virtual event today. It's a pleasure for me to be part of the 6th biannual ENR Behave event that focuses on applying behavioral insights in energy efficiency. This is a platform for policymakers, as you all know, academia, industry, and practitioners to discuss the aims and measures for energy efficiency improvements and climate mitigation. So I hope that next time we will meet each other already in person. So I would like to thank the Portuguese Council Presidents and the Portuguese colleagues for their ongoing work. You chair the negotiations in an outstanding manner to advance the dialogue on very important proposals, not least reaching an agreement on the EU climate law yesterday morning. And yesterday night, Portugal was also the first member state to submit their recovery and resilience plan. So I'm thankful that in her speech, Her Excellency Inês dos Santos Costa mentioned the topics such as energy labeling, that 4/5, so around 80–85% of the EU population recognize, and the majority of people base their product purchase decisions on it. And also for mentioning energy sufficiency, where we're currently discussing a closely related topic of carbon budgets and extending a cap and trade system, like the EU ETS, to buildings and transport. So let me take you back 1.5 years, back when the Commission started the work on the European Green Deal. We knew the importance of behavioral aspects. It was very important to decarbonize, to address the end-use sectors, and to make sure that everybody has access to renewable energy as much as it is produced. But then the pandemic hit. So we found ourselves chained indoors, almost every one of us across the European Union. The economy slowed down, the household incomes shrunk. So, as a Commission, we needed to stop and reassess our approach. We soon realized that the situation is actually an opportunity, and we need to make the best use of it. This is the moment to rebuild the economy and to make it more sustainable and more resilient. So the direction of travel was absolutely clear already from the European Green Deal. And we made quickly available financial support. The multi-annual financial framework and the Next Generation EU, which is the main recovery support instrument, taken together, they provide around 1.8 trillion euros for the period of 7 years. The largest part of it goes to the Recovery and Resilience Facility. Its volume is over 700 billion euros of grants and loans. This can be used in EU member states to support investments and reforms with a focus on green transition. A certain part of the money, roughly 1/3, is earmarked for climate-related investments. So this means that approximately 250 billion euros are expected to be available from the Recovery and Resilience Fund alone. For innovation, the main energy policy support instrument is the Horizon 2020. This is now transforming into Horizon Europe. It has launched a number of future-looking topics and initiatives, and it has funded, the Horizon 2020 energy efficiency funds have funded 380 projects with a total budget of 780 million. This has mobilized nearly 2,400 stakeholders across Europe. Project support for societal research teams are increasingly important. So the main topics that the Horizon focuses on are the operationalization of the energy efficiency first principle, demand-side modeling, the multiple impacts and also benefits of policy, and of course, behavioral insights. To mention one project, I would like to highlight the Horizon 2020 PENNY project. This is an abbreviation of psychological, social, and financial barriers to energy efficiency. It focuses on and what it found out was that the limited knowledge of the cost of energy represents a significant barrier to the households. This is why the European Commission has worked over the previous several years, also under previous mandates, on making metering and billing clearer for the consumers. Individuals' tendency towards to maintain the situation as it is an important determinant of the level of energy consumption of European households. And a very important conclusion was that local policy should play a more prominent role. So from 2021, the new LIFE Clean Energy Transition subprogram will continue the work of EU Horizon 2020. Now let me take you to the political level again for a moment. While member states are in the middle of planning and programming these various measures and finance, one must realize that this is actually a unique opportunity to build back better, to empower the consumers, and to invest in a future-looking, future-proof project that engages many people. As Her Excellency pointed out, all levels of the society will need to contribute to the energy transition. There's no single silver bullet. She also underlined that people are at the center of the fair transition towards a climate neutral union by 2050. So this idea is also the central idea of the European Green Deal. It is truly designed as a people-centered policy, and let me explain in a couple of points how and why. First of all, the reflection behind is that there are plenty of benefits to decarbonization. If done right, it can cut emissions, create jobs, improve people's living conditions, and also reduce energy bills. So before the crisis, we found out that there were 6.9% of the EU population that could not afford to heat their homes sufficiently. This means that 34 million Europeans struggle to keep their homes adequately warm in winter. And possibly there are additional people that find it hard to cool their homes in hot summer days. Although we have seen that the energy poverty figures have reduced threefold over the last decade, and that the figures have improved continuously, it remains still a big challenge, and to eradicate energy poverty will be a very big challenge. So the reasons for energy poverty are not straightforward. There are different elements at play, such as low household income, high expenditure on the other side of disposable income on energy, and poor energy efficiency that play a significant role. Now, we can't directly increase people's wages or decide what they spend their money on, but we can make policies that leave more resources for the household through energy efficiency. In the end, energy poverty adds up to one of the most serious societal problems. It has detrimental long-term effects on individuals, for their health, for example, on the economy, and on the planet. Because the best kilowatt hour is the kilowatt hour that we don't need to generate in the first place. This is the most effective and efficient kilowatt hour in terms of the resource use, but also generation and grid management. So this takes me to the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. And member states already need to look into the mechanisms behind energy poverty as required by the EPBD. The Commission also issued a dedicated energy poverty recommendations last autumn together with the renovation wave. However, poverty is a national concern and there is no standard definition of it. Member states develop their own criteria according to their national and regional context. And this is why now the renovation wave strategy is so important. One of the basic principles of the strategy is to protect the right of everyone to have affordable, livable, accessible, and healthy housing. So along with eco-design and energy labeling, metering and billing, and demand-side aggregation that the consumers will hopefully one day be part of, this is as personal as energy policy can get to any European citizen. So no person in need should remain stranded alone facing their difficulties. And our role as the representatives of the public domain at the Commission, but hopefully also at other administrative levels, is to ensure that there is a place where people can turn to and to get an answer to their questions. This is why the renovation wave includes the following elements: the use of technical assistance as a matter of urgency to deploy it as quickly as possible, and we have the financial resources for that made available by the EU. Secondly, addressing the worst performing buildings, and finally, working together. And working together is a very important component for renovation. A neighborhood approach and grassroots initiatives are at the center of a fast and broad energy transition. And what we invest in engaging people and explaining the transition really saves us time and effort in the long run. And mind you, what is particular with renovation and buildings is that the project pipelines can be mobilized relatively quickly in a matter of months and years compared to big infrastructure projects. But its benefits will run along the lifeline of the built environment, so usually decades. And the sooner that we start, the sooner we actually start enjoying the benefits. So lower energy bills, lower investment into energy grids, less energy imports, higher share of renewables because energy consumption, because we always have to catch up with energy consumption, so to say. So lower energy consumption means that we can fulfill the ambitious percentages quicker and with less investment into renewables. And the Commission engages with the communities from various angles. And there are 3 initiatives I would like to mention. The Affordable Housing Initiative, the new European Bauhaus, and the Climate Pact that offer platforms for different levels of the society to engage with the Commission and gather all the ideas possible from the ground. So as the full scope of COVID-19 emerges, so does actually the opportunity to commit to our Green Deal objective of achieving a just transition that leaves no one behind. Thanks to the Recovery and Resilience Fund and the Just Transition Fund, we have the resources. So to conclude, what do we need to ensure right now? If you ask me, I would say these are the one-stop shops and the complete service for the end user, from awareness raising to construction, accompanying them throughout the process, and advice on the actual use of buildings. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the good discussion today. Back to you, Irmeli.
Thank you, Karlis. Thank you very much. That was a very good overview of what's going on in your work days today and into Europe in general. I'm sure there were several questions. I have listed quite a bit questions here, but I think you covered most of them already in your speech, and we are a bit late in our session, so I guess we'll just go to the next speaker. Thank you very much, Karlis, again. And our next speaker is Professor Jakob Ladenburg from Danish Technological University. And Jakob has a PhD in environmental and resource economics, and he's a professor in economics at the Technical University of Denmark, Department of Technology Management and Economics. Jakob has since 2003 conducted research focusing on consumer preferences and acceptance of renewable energy sources, in particular wind energy. He has published more than 15 scientific articles and 8 book chapters on the subjects. Jakob's research focuses on how preferences and acceptance of different technologies vary as a function of densities of existing renewable energy structures, casual differences in experience with renewable energy sources, and the impact of age and intergenerational differences. Thank you for joining us today, Jakob, and sharing your insights. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the nice presentation. I've been looking forward to give my speech. I'll be showing you some slides, and hopefully I can complement the 2 previous speeches by addressing some of the issues that they have been looking at. I'm going to talk about efficient renewable energy transition from a socioeconomic perspective. That has already been addressed partly by the 2 previous speakers, but my presentation will focus very much on a consumer level. The efficient energy transition to a green production, well, it's an interplay between technology, consumers, and society. I have added consumers in the middle because consumers are the ones who are making this link or these links. Consumers, they consume, they demand, they purchase technologies, they purchase goods that are produced by different technologies. They have perceptions of technologies, acceptance of technologies, and through their choices, and through their perceptions, through their voting behavior, they produce a downstream of signals to society relating to which kind of technologies do they prefer, which technologies do they not prefer, which are vital for an efficient transition to green production. So it's often the question, how do we move from state A to state B in the smartest way? applied or socioeconomics can provide us with some of these answers, because here we take the origin consumer level and try to compare different impacts, different demands, economic measures, and thereby try to unify different properties or aspects of an efficient transition. This is the model that I try to speak from. In the upper left corner, we have technology. Technology can be renewable resource technologies such as wind power, photovoltaics. Technologies can also be daily living technologies, washing machines. Technologies can be smart technologies such as the technologies that are put into electrical cars today. But technologies can also be carbon storage, the carbon capture technologies, which we expect will help us in an efficient energy transition. But the technologies are strongly dependent on how the use of these technologies and the cost are strongly dependent on how consumers perceive these technologies. As I mentioned before, we consume, we evaluate, we have opinions, we have perceptions, attitudes towards different technologies. And if there are some technologies that we dislike, then it's going to increase most likely the cost of those technologies. But of course, our demands, our perceptions, our attitudes, they're not static, they are dynamic. They're movable, they can be changeable. First of all, naturally, it's a function of the knowledge that we have about these technologies and the needs for those technologies. When we talk about a green transition, well, one of the knowledge levels that we hope that people have is that we have impacts associated with climate changes. So that's kind of a first level of knowledge. But as we also heard, it's also about behavior. How do we behave today? How do we consume? As we'll come back to, how do we time our consumption? And it's also about questions about dynamics effects, structural changes in the society that influence the choice of technologies and perception of the different technologies impacts and so forth. And lastly, the landscape, talking about wind farms, photovoltaics, hydro dams, biomass. Changes using these technologies have an impact on the landscape that we live in, where we spend our leisure time, thereby also how we as consumers perceive these different technologies. Okay, if we start with the technology, well, it's good to have to think about, well, what is privately and publicly supplied and demanded? Privately driven technologies, well, that market functions by itself, but publicly driven requires some effort from the public side. For example, photovoltaics on rooftop in the EU. A lot of private households have photovoltaics on the rooftops, so therefore it's demand privately supplied. But often it's also publicly driven because we have subsidies for those photovoltaics on rooftops. Without the subsidies, it wouldn't be worth doing. Offshore wind farms on EU level, EU is one of the areas or larger regions which have the most ambitious plans for offshore wind farm development, one of the areas where we already have a lot of offshore wind farms. It's publicly supplied, but it could also potentially be privately demand driven. If there's a market for electricity from different renewable sources, potentially household would be willing to pay an extra premium for having their electricity from an offshore wind farm relative to onshore, nearshore, biomass, photovoltaics, or even brown energy. Then, of course, we have subsidies and public tenders with the public can use, the society can use to push forward technologies that we want to have a larger share of the market. But it's also a question about how do technologies mature in the best possible manner. Why is that relevant? Well, if we, from a consumer perspective, can give our evaluation at an early stage, the development of the technology, the location of the technology, the design of the technology, potentially can help us improve the acceptance of that technology afterwards. We talk a lot about carbon storage in EU and worldwide. Where's the carbon going to be stored? Old mine pits in Europe, for example. But if people living around those areas have uncertainties about those storage technologies, well, potentially we could add that in the development of that storage technology. So it's not only a question about engineering, but it's also a question about adding the perspectives of the consumer and thereby mitigating potential oppositions towards those technologies. And then there's a question about which technology should be prioritized first. Offshore, onshore. Presently, onshore wind turbines is the least cost wind alternative, but offshore is moving forth. So how do we make decision on which alternative to prioritize first? Well, that's here where socioeconomics come into play versus other grounds or other reasons. Naturally, socioeconomic or economic in general is just an input like the input of an engineer, so forth. But at least it's a valuable input to take into account. Knowledge, the knowledge of the consumer is going to influence their choices and their perception. Uncertainties about the needs and the consequences for renewable energy technologies, a case that I mentioned before about whether or not people are aware of the impacts of global climate change. That's one level to start at. And these uncertainties, well, they can differ between different technologies, even the impacts from the different technologies. Impacts from offshore wind farms in terms of marine life relatively to impacts on local labor market might differ. And here it's important to take into account that people might have risk-averse, risk-taker opinions about these different impacts. And what is relevant here is that risk-averse, risk-taker, it introduces some non-linearities into the decision process from the consumer, the perceptions, thereby also add some dynamics into the decision process on which products to consume and thereby the efficiency of our energy transition. But it could also be missing information about the impacts of our own consumption in relation to the larger picture. We looked into that in a paper in Applied Energy Letters in 2013. In the paper, we used data where we asked households to make choices between different agreements, contracts with the local energy supplier. The contracts were related to that the energy supplier could shut off different electrical devices in household at different frequencies and different durations. Of course, there was also a compensation for the household. And the households, they made choices between different compositions of these attributes. What was relevant of that study was that half of the respondents were given some more information. They were given information about how a higher share of renewable energy, the energy mix, made it more difficult to predict the energy supply on a energy producer and supplier level, and thereby also increasing the needs for a flexible consumption on household. And how did that information work? Well, it actually worked in the way that we expected to do. Household made more contracts with the local energy supplier, and the level of compensation that we required was also small. But it could also be the missing information about the benefits and cost of existing and new technologies. As we already heard, well, we expect that renewable energy technologies and other smart new technologies, they're going to generate a lot of jobs. Well, if some of these jobs are generated in the local area where these technologies are put up, such as local nearshore wind farms or onshore wind farms or photovoltaics, well, that is important information to address the people living in those areas, because that might help them, help getting them to accept the local energy production facility to a higher extent. There's always been said a lot about behavior, about energy behavior and so forth. And I agree it's important. How do we consume today? What is the durability, the recyclability, and sustainability of the choices that I make, of the products that I buy? Do they move against a cost-efficient energy transition, or do they move towards it? It's really important to take into account, because on an individual level, I'm expected to maximize my own utility and therefore make choices that have the least cost relative to utility that I gain. So it might be, and I think in many countries and in many areas it is like that, among many consumers, we do not buy durable products. We buy cheap products that have a low durability and most likely a low recyclability also, and thereby society have to invest too much money in production of these goods. We end up with a problem with the waste afterwards. It's also a question about when do I consume? Timing relative to production and storage capacity. The case as before. it does matter when I choose to consume electricity, for example, in a framework or in a world where we have more renewable energy in the system that is less predictable. If I don't take that into account, if I don't have any incentives, any nudging for me, which makes me make these more society-related efficient choices, then I'll just do whatever I feel like. But potentially different smart technologies, incentives from energy companies, which might require specific changes in legislation in the different EU countries, will help us giving these incentives to make more efficient choices from a society point. And then it has been mentioned, how do budgets constrain consumer choices impact our choice? As we heard, 34 million Europeans had difficulties paying the electricity bill, at least having sufficient heat in the households. And this is a problem because green transition investments, they are more costly in the short run. So how can we make it affordable for low-income groups? They are not a negligible group in Europe or worldwide. We need to have everybody on board. So which economic tools can we take use of to make it more affordable for low-income groups? It's important to take into account. Then we have the dynamics effect of the technologies or the product of the technologies, or the impacts of the technologies. They can be self-enhancing. So the more that we have the technology, the more pro do we become of the technology, or more cheap it becomes to have that technology. Or it could be the other way around. One example is in the case of wind power, cumulative effects. In a paper in Energy, we look into how does the number of onshore wind turbines in my local area influenced by perception of more onshore wind turbines. And we find a negative relation. The more wind turbines that I can see in that local area, or that are in that local area, the less positive I am towards more onshore turbines. And they are not linear, they're not completely linear, these effects, suggesting that there might be some threshold levels, which when we go beyond, the opposition towards wind power will decrease to a larger extent. So that's important to take into account. Spatial effects also. What I mean with spatial effects, but the distance from where I'm living to the nearest potential site or nearest existing renewable energy facility. In the paper in Renewable Sustainable Energy Reviews, we ask people to make choices between different onshore or offshore locations. And we use the information about the distance from where people are living to the nearest potential offshore wind farm. The offshore wind farms could be put at 8, 12, 18, 50 kilometers from the shore, thereby minimizing the visual impacts. That paper finds that the closer I live to a potential site, offshore development site, the higher is my willingness to pay for having that offshore wind farm moved far from the shore. And the other way around, people living far from that offshore wind farm have a lower willingness to pay for having the wind farm moved further away from the coast. Naturally, this has these spatial effects important to take into account when we plan, for example, wind power developments, because these preferences for locating offshore wind farms further from the shore is also an impression of the cost of developing offshore. Then I think that's a really important issue that we need to address, generation effects. Younger generations are more concerned about sustainability and are more interested in technology in older generations. I can see I have 2 daughters of 15 and 12-year-old. That suits them quite well. Why is this important? Well, if younger generations have a higher acceptance of new technologies and their impacts, such as wind power, that will influence the way that we are going to develop wind power in Denmark. There are 2 examples. There's a paper with Alex Dubgaard in 2007 in Energy Policy, and the paper I mentioned before in Renewable Sustainable Energy Review. We will look into that. Starting with the paper by Dubgaard and I, we asked people about locating wind farms at 50, 18, 12, and 8 kilometers from the shore. And here, highlighted by the red area, we find that younger people under 30 years of age, they have no willingness to pay to move wind farms beyond 8 kilometers from the shore. Whereas older generations have positive and significant willingness to pay to move wind farms further away. That has also been shown here. Here we have willingness to pay for locating the wind farms 50 kilometers from the shore, locating wind farms offshore relative to onshore, and locating wind farms onshore 1,000 meters from residential areas relative to 500 meters from residential areas. And the signal is quite clear. The older the respondents are, the higher is the willingness to pay to minimize the visual impact. And what is really important to look at here is the older the respondents are, the higher is the willingness to pay to move offshore wind, move wind farms offshore relative to onshore. The willingness to pay difference is almost threefold between a person 20 years of age and a person 70 years of age. If these effects are generation dependent, then the way we choose to develop onshore, offshore has to take this into account. Otherwise, we might invest way too much money in putting wind farms too far from shore because younger generations simply have a different perception of the visual impacts from offshore wind farms. These results here, it's important to stress out, they are not causal. So I can't say that these are generation effects. They are relations, but we definitely need to look more into how generations perceive different technologies, especially different renewable resource technologies. Then we have the technology of the landscape. What is beautiful and what is ugly? Wind turbines onshore, offshore, but that's important to take into account because the wind turbines are going to change the landscape that we are living in. But we have some dimensions that we can work. Size of the turbine, numbers, shape, color. We need to address research to look into how does this improve the acceptance of onshore and offshore wind turbines. Likewise with photovoltaics, putting them on private rooftops, industrial buildings, and agricultural land. And cultural is in capital letters because we see in Europe a tendency for large-scale photovoltaic development on agricultural land and thereby completely changing the rural landscape. People can come out in areas where a couple of years ago there will be fields, corn, maize, depending on where we are in Europe, and suddenly they will have this mirror landscape, or at least reflections from several hundred acres of photovoltaics development. Then again, how does the distance influence the perception of impacts from the technologies, as I mentioned before? Then I also think it's important to take into account what is dangerous in this technology landscape. Low frequency noise from onshore, from wind turbines is a common issue that is addressed. I'm not quite sure whether it has been proven that low frequency noise actually is dangerous, but nevertheless, if people experience that issue with wind turbines in the technology landscape, and thereby have a more negative perception of the wind turbines, it's something that we need to address. We can't take away people's that's important to address. So as a concluding remark, I'm going back to my model here. We have the different technologies, renewable energy technologies, carbon storage, carbon capture technologies, smart technologies, all the technologies that we're going to rely on in an efficient energy transition. The level, the acceptance of those technologies depends on the consumer. Consumers demand perceptions of the impacts, acceptance of the technologies are going to be a driver of how these technologies can be used, and thereby also by the cost efficiency. Of course, these consumer perceptions, demands, willingness to pay, they're not static. As we talked about, they're influenced by the knowledge, behavior, the dynamic structural effects, and the landscape where the technologies are put in. So as a concluding remark, and in line with the two other presenters, taking the point of the consumer is important when we are talking about efficient energy transition. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jakob. Very, very interesting presentations, and I especially like your comparison what the younger generations think as opposed to the oldest generation. That's very interesting and something we really have to consider in our work. We are already exceeding our time here in the session, and thus we can't take any questions at this point. But Jakob, if you are willing to answer questions later on, would you share your email address in the chat, please?
Yes, thank you. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Yes.
Okay. And before we go for a coffee break, I just a quick reminder on the how to go to breakout rooms. You have there are 3 breakout rooms, and you can choose the one you want to go to, and there's a breakout room button on the bottom of the Zoom screen. So just push the click the button. The rooms will be activated maybe 10 minutes before the session started at 10:30. And thank you for to all of our speakers, and thank you for to audience. We had a very good session and very interesting presentations. Now we have a full day ahead of us with a number of interesting topics to be discussed. And now the coffee break is for half an hour, which we have spent like 5 minutes already of it. But let's get back to conference at 10:30. Thank you very much and have a great day.